guys, welcome back to the Bean Museum. My name is Marin and I'm going to be giving you your Life Science Live today. And we are going to be talking about some very exciting things regarding evolution. Now, saying that we're talking about evolution is like saying that it's a big subject. So it's like saying that we're talking about biology today, or we're talking about science today. You know, it's a big topic with a lot of different things. We could talk about this every single Friday if we wanted to. So we're just going to be talking about just a few things. Specifically, I want to talk about convergent evolution. Now, we're going to talk about what that means, and I promise if you're a little bit wary about, oh, I don't know, that sounds kind of like a big word, I don't know a lot about evolution, that's okay. I'm going to help you out. We're going to go step by step here. So, convergent evolution is the idea that some animals gain certain traits as well as other animals, but they don't get them from the same source. So, it's a lot easier if I give you an example. So, as an example, let's see, a really famous one that lots of people talk about when they talk about convergent evolution is eyes. Now, eyes evolved in a couple of different ways. There were ways that it evolved with like mammals and other things that are related to mammals, but it evolved at a different time in cephalopods, things like squids and octopuses. So they came from different ancestors without eyes, and they both evolved eyes. So that's just kind of the basic idea of what we're going to be talking about. And I have a bunch of different examples that'll help clarify everything. But I want to define a few things really quick before we talk more about evolution. I want to define relation. I said things that were, they were related to these things, they had ancestors. So really quick, when we talk about something that is related, it doesn't mean that they're related like, oh, I'm related to my brother. It's more like way, way, way back in the past, because evolution happens over thousands of years. So when we talk about things being related, we often can see if something is closely related or not based on how we classify them. You guys might have heard terms like kingdom and phylum and species, all those terms thrown around. So we're going to talk about those really quick. The terms are kingdom, phylum, order, let's see. I have a way of remembering this because even now I can't remember exactly which order they go in. So it goes kings, play, chess on fat guys' stomachs. So K, kings, is kingdoms. Play, phylums, starts with a P. Kings play chess is class. On is order. Fat, family. Guys, genus. And stomachs is species. So kings play chess on fat guys' stomachs. That's how I remember kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. There it is. Now, the reason that we're talking about that is because if something shares the same genus, for example, that means that they're really, really closely related because they're off just by one thing. All of the things leading up to it, we've got, kingdom, phylum, all of that will be the same. The only difference will be the species in that listing. If we have something that shares in order, that's going to be way back here, or even a phylum, that's all the way back here. That means that they share these two things and not these ones, so they're not closely related. So you can tell when something, easily tell when we've classified something as closely related because they will have similar, species or order or something closer to the end of the list. And if they're distantly related, they'll share something at the beginning of the list. All right, so let's talk about convergent evolution. So first things first, the reason that this whole idea came up was because last week on Friday we talked about moths and butterflies. Now, those two insects have scales on their wings. I showed you some butterflies. I've got them here again so I can show you. If we look really closely here, you can see how it kind of looks a little bit almost like pixelated. you can see how it's a little bit fuzzy looking around the edges. That's because, you can see a bit of reflection too. That's because each color on these butterflies is made of individual scales. Now, when I mentioned that they are made of scales, somebody asked, well, if they have scales, does that mean they're closely related to snakes? Which was an awesome question. And that is a great example of convergent evolution. We talked about how they weren't related, how they evolved at different times, but it didn't really feel like a complete answer because convergent evolution, like I said, evolution's a big topic, and answering it in just a quick little answer didn't feel quite like enough. So here's a better answer about whether or not they're related. So butterflies have scales as well as things like reptiles. So you can see this is a crocodile leg, or sorry, an alligator leg, and it's covered in scales. Now the scales are two different things, and they evolved from different species. So they both had ancestors that did not have scales, and then they evolved to have them. So reptiles at one point had an ancestor that did not have scales that evolved to have scales, and butterflies the same way. Now, because they aren't related, even though they have these both have similar structures, two similar traits, we call that analogous structures. Now, you might be familiar with some other analogous structures. One that you definitely can think of, if I were to say like, oh, what are some things that lots of animals have, but that might not be related? You might think of one like wings, like all these birds I have here behind me. Wings are an excellent example of convergent evolution because flight evolved 4 different times, okay? So we have flight in birds, flight in insects, flight in reptiles with the pterosaur, the dinosaurs, and the last one, flight in mammals. All right, so if you were to look at all of their wings, they all do the same thing. They all help the animal to fly, but they all are built differently. So first things first, I'm gonna bring out those butterflies again. These guys have wings, but they're very different from the wings of the birds, the pterosaurs, and the mammals, the bats specifically. So we're looking at insect wings. They don't have any bone inside them because they are invertebrates. So they don't have a skeleton on the inside. They have an exoskeleton, which is the crunchy sound when you step on an insect. That's that sound. That's the exoskeleton. So these guys here have wings, but they don't have any bones inside of them, unlike the other 3 that we're going to talk about. So you can already see, even though they have wings and the ability to fly, they're very, very different from the other ones. Now, birds have a different kind of wing. Now, we have 10 digits, 5 on each finger, okay? And other animals have those digits as well in different ways. So birds, for example, instead of having 5 fingers, their bones evolved to be fused together into one bone. And that bone, they kind of fly like this. This is where their wings attach. This is where all the muscles are, and they fly like this. Then we have the pterosaurs, the flying dinosaurs that evolved, and they, instead of evolving their fused fingers, they had 5 digits, but one of them was just extra, extra long. It was the pinky finger. So their pinky fingers were super, super long, and they had a bunch of skin in between the tip of their pinky finger and their elbow, and all around here they had skin that allowed them to fly. So pterosaurs fly like this. Lastly, we have the flying mammals, or the bats. I have a bat here to show you, so you can see a little better what I'm talking about. His wings are a little bit torn because they are very fragile once we've dried them out. The wings are just a little bit of skin, so you can imagine they get really, really fragile. You can see right there, there's his little finger, okay, so that's one finger, that's his thumb, actually, right there. And then you can see the different bones right here. There's one right there, one right there. Those are all finger bones. that have just evolved to be long and extended. So bats have a lot of skin, a lot of webbing in between their fingers, and they fly like this. So you can see, even though they all evolved to fly, it's the same thing. They all are able to fly, they're able to have sustained flight where they're not just gliding or falling or something like that, but it evolved in lots of different ways. Now, another example of convergent evolution with analogous structures. So remember, convergent evolution is when two things evolve the same type of thing, like flight, but at different times, okay? And they don't have a similar ancestor that shared that trait. So, convergent evolution, another example, with analogous structures, the ones that are the same trait between two species, like the wings of a butterfly and the wings of a bird, is the streamlined body. So for example, in fish, when fish evolved, they evolved this body shape here to help them to be more hydrodynamic, more easier to swim through the water more efficiently. So these guys right here, efficiently, get it? A fish. Anyways. Our fish here has this streamlined body shape, but there are also things like whales and dolphins, which are mammals. They're part of a completely different, I believe, class than fish, okay? So fish have this shape, but dolphins and whales have also evolved this shape as well as tails to help them to swim and be more efficient swimming through the water. Now, another thing that also evolved this, thank you. They said my joke was good. All right. Another guy that evolved that hydrodynamic, very smooth shape is the penguin. Now these guys, you can't quite see it with the way that he's set up right now, but he actually, from his beak to his tail, back here, his little nubby tail, he's shaped similar to the way the fish is shaped. He kind of is like a little bullet shape, a little bit of an oval, and it helps him to swim through the water very quickly. Now, not all birds share this shape. We can look back here at these ducks, and they have similar features, but they don't have the same. Lots of them have long necks, more bulbous heads. You can see here they wouldn't be as dynamic through the water in the same way that the penguin is. Now, just because they're the same shape, remember, doesn't mean that they're very closely related. So how is it, out of all of this, if we can't just look at the animals and say, well, that one looks similar to that one, so they must be related. How is it that we can tell when things are or aren't closely related in evolution? Ugh. Well, my friends, that is done by looking at the animal's DNA. And if you look at the DNA, you're better able to see how things evolved and possibly when they evolved along the timeline. There's lots of scientists that are able to look at the genetics of an animal and decide, okay, this has a totally different DNA code from this other one, which means that they're just not related at all. Or these two have really similar ones, so even though they look totally different, they're actually very closely related. Now, when things look different but are closely related in evolution, so not an analogous structure, it is called a homologous structure. So for example, again, let's go back to our hands. We have, like I said, 5 digits, and in whales and dolphins, they have those flippers, like we were talking about, that help them to have that nice hydrodynamic shape. Those flippers actually have finger bones inside of them, but they don't have individual fingers the same way that we do, and they're used for a totally different thing. We use our hands for grabbing and feeling and things like that, and they use their flippers for swimming and propelling themselves through the water. So the bones are actually very similar, and they come from the same ancestor, but they're used for different things, so that is called a homologous structure. Now I have one last example, just really quick. I wanted to show you this insect here, we looked at butterflies first. We talked about the wings of the butterflies. Now, insects have evolved, they have lots of different forms of flight, and their wings look lots of different ways and shapes. You can see here, this is a grasshopper. He's got much more veiny looking wings. He doesn't have the scales like a butterfly does. They're very transparent, they're very see-through. So those two are very, very different. But in this case, the wings still evolved from the same place. So they came from the same ancestor, and they're used for the same purpose. So they are neither analogous structures or homologous structures. Because remember, analogous means they do the same thing, but came from different ancestors. And homologous means that they do different things, but they came from the same ancestor. Wings in insects all came from the same ancestor. The earliest flying insect was is thought to be the mayfly. And so any wings that evolved after that came from that same genetic structure. So even though they look really, really different, this is one of the ways that scientists can tell when they look at the DNA of the animals. They can say, okay, these wings look pretty different from these wings, but these wings are from the same ancestor, and these wings are not. So it's just kind of an interesting topic in evolution. So next time when you're out looking at things, be sure to be thinking about the different structures that animals have, like the shape of their feet, or the shape of their wings, or the shape of their mouth, how their organs evolve, and things like that. Think about those things and how they are similar or different to other animals. And then you can go back and research whether or not they are homologous structures or analogous structures, or whether those animals are closely related enough that they came from the same ancestor. It's a kind of a personal favorite of mine to talk about. So just some interesting things right there about convergent evolution. All right, guys, that is all for today for Life Science Live. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have any questions about any of the stuff that I've talked about today, convergent evolution, being related through evolution, homologous structures, analogous structures, any of those things, if you have any questions about that, feel free to comment down below, and we will get back to you to answer those as best we can. But for now, we'll see you guys probably on Monday. Bye!